So we've got the recording started. So it's Friday evening, U.S. time. Glad to see you guys. Uh, David, you have just given rebirth to an old topic. Rebirth. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. My question is, I think I heard you mention that the word rebirth actually isn't in the suttas. That's
Right.
not a accurate translation.
That's a terrible translation. It's intendedly sometimes, I think, and actually intended to be a bad translation, just so that the translator doesn't catch a bunch of flack from the right wing of the Buddhist party. The
That
word is the word that's actually used is jati, but there's some other words that are also used that are badly translated, trying to point back to rebirth. The word jati actually has the quality of beginning or starting. Just like in English language, we use the word birth for a lot of different ways. That it actually does not have to do with a female human pregnancy or dogs or whatever. That the Navy uses the word birth, which is a docking space. We also use the word berth in the sense of a place to sleep, a bag to sleep in. We also use the word birth in the beginning like something new, like the birth of the blues. All right. Where was the pregnancy and the birth of the blues? Oh, well, it was South American and African was the parents of the blues and jazz. So anyway, um, we can say then that the word jati needs to be used carefully rather than automatically picking something out of a bad lexicon because everybody else makes that mistake. I might as well make it too. And I won't do the research that I need to do to look up the word to find out what it means because if I do, I'll get in trouble with people like Bhikkhu Bodhi. So, what's your follow on with that question?
It's just interesting how that got changed to the word rebirth. Like everyone seems to translate that as rebirth, but you don't actually find that word.
Well,
It's
that's
not.
the intention. There is an active and ongoing discussion, and I've actually had this discussion partly with Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, as to whether the Visuddhimagga was right-wing propaganda, or was it actually Buddhist literature? And it begins to look more and more like it was right-wing propaganda, and that the suttas have been subjected to right-wing propaganda in various places. And so when the West got introduced to Buddhism, there was no real teaching of the Dhamma in there. It was all right-wing propaganda, Asian right-wing propaganda. Now it's Western right-wing propaganda, but that's all it is. It's religion. It's trying to take the teachings of the Buddha out of the present moment and turn it into religion so that somebody can make some money off of it. And so these translations, you can see that jati is the actual word that's used in Paticca Samuppada. And that you could say then that the birth is either the birth of the self or it's the birth of dukkha. Okay? That being born will always give rise to old age, sickness, and death. And we're not talking about on the grand scale of reincarnation, but we're talking about that it happens with each lifetime. It happens with every laptop. It happens with every cell phone. It happens with every automobile. That automobile gets born, and then it get old, and then it'll get broken down, and then it's going to be put in the junk heap. So the word jati there means that kind of birth, but it doesn't necessarily mean that things happen over and over again in a great big grand cycle. But it did in Hinduism. It did for the Brahmins, because the Brahmins were making a huge amount of money off of it, basically through funerals. Their style has been in the time of the Buddha, and is certainly continuing right along today, is that when an old Brahmin dies, he wants to go to the Brahmin priest. And the Brahmin priest is going to charge him only one fee for that funeral. All of his property, all of his land. I want everything. I don't care about your kids, and you shouldn't either. You should care about your next rebirth. You give me your property, we'll give you a proper funeral, and then you'll get a better next life. And so the Brahmins were challenged on that. In fact, they were originally challenged way back when, and they came up with this concept of rebirth and reincarnation. And how they did it was, oh, well, we do all the priestly stuff here in India because we were the ones who were designated. We're born into it. And you weren't born a Brahmin. That means somewhere in the past you weren't good enough to be born a Brahmin. And that's the start of it. And it happened, according to some scholars, about 800 BC, about 300 years before the Buddha. And so rebirth and reincarnation was still kind of a hot topic back then. And if you think about it, Western civilization has been getting along for at least a couple of thousand years without any concept or knowledge of rebirth. They had the concept of you're going to go to hell, or that you're going to go to heaven. But this is just a concept. You'd think that if it was actually real, it would be actually universal. Sort of like stories of floods. All right? Stories of floods are universal. Every time we can get a hold of really old literature, they'll talk about the flood, because we know that Lesser Andreas and all of that kind of stuff, and, sort of like global warming out of an ice age, and things get flooded out. So there's some universal knowledge. There's also universal knowledge built into our language, which may be even older, like ma, mare, mama, mother. Those words are all, as opposed to per, papa, Pedro, papa, Peter, father, that language is kind of universal. Even in the Thai language, which is a Proto-Chinese language, we have mare and kunpa, and mare. So that shows how universal that kind of language is. It goes all over the world. And deep rebirth, that in fact the whole concept, here's an interesting point about it, and that is that the pharaohs and the Romans, old Romans, wanted to be, but the pharaohs started it kind of first, in the sense of elevating the ruler or the king up to God's status. And it was very, very rare. Oh, hello, Scott.
Hello.
Good to see you.
Good to see you
We're
too.
about to start talking about a topic that I think that you'd be interested in, like Keyshawn. But let's finish this short intro into rebirth. Here's something that kind of interesting that happened. In the old days, it was only kings, pharaohs, and whatnot that expected to be reborn, because only they could afford the services of the priests that could go through all of the detailed ceremonies of mummification and carving things on walls and whatnot like that. But somewhere around 300 BC's, mummies from that age started popping up. I mean, almost all the mummies they find is from this time period, from the Ptolemies onwards. Why is that? Well, it was because possibly the idea that anyone could be reborn if you got enough priests to talk about it. And so anybody who had money in Egypt began to have their priest get them to be mummified so that they too could become a god and go on to the next life. That in fact, having a next life and being a god are kind of synonymous. It was in the time of the pharaohs anyway. So the point is that such a belief is delicious.
Mm.
It is a delicious thing to recognize that, oh, if I die, that's all right. I'll come back. I can use the resources of this life, either having some priest friends or somebody do some ceremony, or maybe it's my own good behavior if I go do some merit, that I'll be reborn in a better place.
Mm.
That is such a delicious, and in fact, that's exactly what we all want anyway. And that's
Right.
exactly what the Dhamma does, is it allows you to be reborn into a better place. You just don't have to go through the actual old age, sickness, and death stuff to do it. That you can do it in this very life. You can be reborn.
Mm. I
Well,
feel
hello,
the self.
Go ahead, David.
I feel the self is always trying to continue in some sense. It's always trying to cling to continuance of itself, right? So this is why there's always like a inclination to continue and survive in some sense. Always a strong drive in the mind to exist, right?
Uh-oh.
Clinging to being. It's a fetter, right? The craving for
Yes.
being and craving for non-being. It's just craving for being. That's why people want to be reborn and as a god, because they're craving for being. It's one of the fetters, right?
That's exactly what it is. It's craving for being,
Mm-hmm.
which is actually rupa raga. That clinging, that demand to be alive, to be here. Uh, I see it in many little ways in human behavior. An example is that there was, I think his name was Will Smith, who was a very famous actor. Do you guys know this guy? And that there was a recent controversy because they were in the Grammys or some big ceremony, and he got out of his seat in the audience and went up on stage. Okay? That's that Rupa Raga. That is the demand that I am here. And we all have that. And so when we hear stories about rebirth and reincarnation, that fits right into that desire to be alive, to be in charge, to want to do.
To be someone.
What was that, David?
To want to be someone important, or just
right. Well, the word important actually is delivered by society. That's part of the culture. The actual desire to be is instinctual. It's called the self-preservation instinct from the scientist. All right, and it's an instinctual thing, and that in fact, even the scientists were ordinary people and screwed up the title. I mean, they couldn't even title it correctly. It's not a self-preservation instinct. That's the delusional part. It's an organism perpetuation. Okay, the preservation of the organism, and we have defenses built in. Biologically, we've got defenses built in emotionally, we've got defenses built in our reaction times. We've got a lot of systems that are there to support that instinct that's built right into our DNA to stay alive, to take one more breath. that in fact, if people are drowning or being smothered or suffocated or when they're hanged, everybody goes through that, doing anything I can to get this next breath. Okay, we'll do anything to get the next breath. And that's really what generally kills us, is because we're so, in fact, if you're being strangled, this is an old, actually, it's a Goju-Rai karate technique. If somebody is strangling you, don't do anything about what they're doing. Just grab them by the side of the head and with both your eyes, push as hard as you can into their eye sockets. They'll let go. Why? Because now they're into that same position. Before, when they've gotten their hands on your throat, they're on top. But now all of a sudden they've gotten badly blinded and are in great pain. Now they're in that survival mode. And so getting their hands off of your throat is easy once they've got something to do with their hands, like protect their eyes. So if we can understand that self-preservation instinct that is so deeply strong within us can be easily propagandized. It can be easily converted. It can be easily manipulated by people who perhaps are even charlatans. The Brahmins may not even believe in rebirth. They're into it for the money. Just like, who's the guy? Rupert Murdoch. He says it's not red or blue, it's green. He's into it for the money, right? He's into it for his own personal power, and he will lie to anyone who will believe him. Now, he just tended to choose the Republican Party and the people, the rednecks, etc., like that, because they're more gullible. They'll believe anything. If they believe in heavens and hells, they'll believe in anything. We want to be able to manipulate people, and getting them at this really, really basic level is a good way to grab them. And so this is the whole point about this rebirth and reincarnation stuff, and heavens and hells in other religions, is all so that people can be manipulated. And if you don't believe in that stuff, it's really hard to manipulate you. And so you can see that the Buddha scriptures, if there's going to be any manipulation in the sutras, any propaganda, this would be the primary place to go, is to try to teach that all the Buddha did teach rebirth and reincarnation, where in fact he taught against it. And this is one of the places, this word jati is one of the places where that's been changed around from just merely the start of something into rebirth over and over again throughout the ages. Now, here's the important point. The important point is the danger lies in the belief, not in the disbelief. They've got it backwards. Oh, you've got to believe in Jesus in order to be saved? Actually, no. That belief system is what prevents you from your own salvation. If you believe in rebirth and reincarnation really strongly, then you'll do things to support that belief. You'll find things that agree with that belief, and you'll do things according to that belief, because that's your salvation. But if you don't believe in it, or if you... Sorry, go ahead, David. Go ahead, I didn't hear you.
I just was saying that it could be dangerous to believe it. It's a dangerous belief.
Yes, that's the hard part for people to understand, that it's actually a dangerous belief. And that the biggest danger is that it will prevent us from practicing correctly. This is, in fact, why the average people in Thailand, who are, good little Buddhist on paper, but they don't practice anapanasati, they don't practice any form of meditation. Here in Thailand, they call it samadhi, but they think that it's too hard and it's too far above them. That's the way that they think. And this is why Bhikkhu Buddhadasa has such a profound impact upon Thailand. It's not because he was able to teach the Noble Dhamma, because the Noble Dhamma was already well taught in Thailand. It was just kept secret. You had to become a monk in order to get it. And Bhikkhu Buddhadasa broke through that barrier to say that anyone can, in fact, get this stuff. And so the belief then, as you can see, if you believe in rebirth and reincarnation, then that's going to prevent you from going through some of the changes, doing the right effort that's needed now. That in fact, you could say that the belief in rebirth and reincarnation is kind of a backdoor or an escape or an excuse for not doing what needs to be done. And so people generally don't practice very well. Now, the possibility is that rebirth actually exists. The real facts is we don't know. It's never had any value for us. It's never seen any indication. There's no proof. There's no evidence. There's no nothing. And so therefore, nobody knows. Scott, do you know? Yes, go ahead, Tim.
Is it enough just to leave it at what the Buddha said, that this is an imponderable? Enough said. Let's stop worrying about this and focus on the skills, focus on the practice, focus on the path.
That's a really excellent point, that it's one of the imponderables. We don't know the beginning of things. We do not know the results of karma. We do not know the results of good or bad actions. If you knew the exact result of whatever action you took, then what kind of stock market would we have? What kind of dollar would we have? Oh no, it has always this up and down and doubt and certainties and all of that kind of stuff that floats our boat, basically. and so the imponderables is correct. That it's not worth thinking about. It's not a ponderable. And that's the way to take it. We don't know for sure. But because there's absolutely no evidence, I'm going to add an additional thing. And that is that it becomes irrelevant. The teaching becomes irrelevant because there's no evidence and we don't know. That even after you die, you may not know.
The Tibetans would say there's lots of evidence.
Pardon? The Tibetans would say?
The Tibetans would say that there is evidence in children that are born with memories, and
that's
sort of
not
thing,
evidence. That's memory. Listen. They don't even trust memories anymore in court. We don't go for eyewitnesses. We want some DNA evidence, right? So throw that Tibetan shtick out. That may have worked 150 years ago, but it's out of class right now. Okay, just because a bunch of kids had a bunch of evidence. Here's another example. I think that it was Janet Reno, who was the main DA in southern Florida around the Miami district. And all of a sudden, while she was the DA, they had a whole bunch of rape cases where uncles and daddies and all kinds of people were raping the girls. And then Janet Reno wound up as secretary of the Department of Justice. That's the word I'm looking for. And then it began to come out because all of these girls, one of them came and says, I'm not really sure if my uncle belongs in jail or not. And she went public. It something, that those days had some sort of social media. Other girls figured it out. The girls got together and recognized that they had all been talked into being raped by psychologists, social workers, the police, and the DA's office, and all of that stuff had talked these girls into being raped by one of their uncles. And a lot of those cases got thrown back out of court. All this happened back in the 1990s. If it had been front and center for you, you'd know what I was talking about. Tim, do you remember any of this?
I remember that when Janet Reno became joined the Bush administration, and those scandals got dragged forward into time. But I don't remember that as a kid. I think that was in the 80s actually when that was really going on, where that was the big craze at that time, and all the teachers and whatnot were afraid that teachers and relatives were afraid that they're going to be next.
Right, exactly. So
There's your
that
fear-driven
proof-
narrative.
That's a good proof right there that memory can be manipulated. It's not accurate. Don't trust on your memory. And a really easy example of that is: any of you have a video, let's say a movie, on your computer, stored as a file? You got it? How about you, David? You got any movies? Okay. All right. Do you know that movie as well as the PC knows it?
Yes.
The PC knows every pixel. It knows every word. It knows every line. It knows every musical instrument's notes throughout the entire performance. It's got it all down. Do you remember your movie? No, you don't remember it. Not like the PC. Look how spotty our memories are. They're terrible. Our memories are not nearly as good as a computer. That just closes that book. We can't trust on memory. So when you say, oh, a bunch of kids had this belief system and they had made up this story, and some monk came by and heard their story and then says, this is the rebirth story. Here, let's check you out. Do you like this toy to play with? Oh, you like that toy to play with? Oh, I know who you were from 400 years ago, because this is the toy that kid played with before he was a Dalai Lama or Panchen Lama or something. Okay. That whole system is designed to, let us say, keep the Tibetan system alive. The Dalai Lama this time has said, or in the past few years, has says, guess what, folks? I'm not coming back. Just like the Buddha said, I'm not coming back. You know why? Because the Chinese government got a hold of a Panchen Lama to try to destroy the religion. So the Dalai Lama is coming up with, I ain't coming back. So that they can't do that. All right. So do you have any other questions about children and their stories and how those manipulated into belief systems?
It's interesting too how all these children that remember their past life, they're in Asia, but you don't find these children in Western countries usually.
Well, if you had a choice, where would you be reborn?
So, Dhammarato, I'm curious, and I love I like let's call it the Jungian notion of the collective unconscious, which seems to be a more elegant way of talking about the instincts that we have. We have these narratives embedded in us that, and we have this life energy that just continually pours forth. We talk about the self, and it's a form of life energy. We feed ourselves with nourishment in order to keep going out into the world and encountering the waves and pushing through. That's where we find meaning. And Jung talked a lot about archetypes. The primary archetype is the anima animus. That's like an animating force in us that propels us towards our sexual gender counterpart. That is the proper expression, mirror expression of what we're looking for out of this life in terms of union with another. And I don't really know where I'm going with this, but overall, I've never heard you talk about Jung, but I've been thinking about it about that a lot lately, in the way in which I can definitely see before the instincts you talk about frequently, especially the self-preservation in all of that. I'm not sure if you're familiar. I'm not trying to ask you a got you question or anything.
But please do. I love got you questions. I've been gotten so many times.
So this idea that, we talk about instincts as if my instincts are the same instincts as a dog, but Jung might say, well, in fact, dog's probably living out some kind of, well, I don't know what the hell Jung would say about a dog and archetypes, but with regards to human, we're living out these stories animistic stories, these stories that come from a deep well within ourselves. And humans have enacted these stories through symbol, through ritual, through myth for many, many thousands of years. And so it's like a more elegant version of those things. And yet all they are is collective. When we say collective unconscious, we're really talking about collective forms of right view, probably. And I'm going to stop there and see what your take on that is.
All right. First off, while a child is still in the womb, it is receiving data. It is receiving data in the form of what's in the blood from mom. It's in the sounds that mom hears, the baby also hears, especially the vibrations and whatnot, especially any noises. So the baby is actually influenced prenatally, and a lot of that stuff actually appears complicated in the sense of the archetypes, the way that Jung put it. But in fact, it's really, really basic programming. All right. So when the baby is born, if it is not well cared for, let us say that it had decent enough either prenatal care or decent enough early birth so that the child feels a sense of well-being. But most of us don't. Most of us have some sort of traumas before we, let us say, can eat our own food. In fact, the worst birth trauma, so they say, is the birth trauma itself, being born. I mean, there we all are in a great big warm hot tub. We're getting beautiful music fed to us. The next thing you know, the earthquake happens, the water breaks, the flood is gone, and all of a sudden we're out of the bathtub or our hot tub. Now, the next thing is that we're held up by our heels by some doctor who beats us on the butt. And we let out such a scream. That scream is actually what they would refer to as the primordial scream. And it requires taking a breath. That's the first work that a baby has to do, is take that first breath, and they take a really big one so that they can really let that scream out. All right. So from then on, including the environment that we're in, whether we are born in a stable or a palace or a wood house or whatever, that kind of stuff affects the baby, even though it's not processed data. It's still it comes in and it's stored. And this is where a lot of the archetypal data comes in. An example of that is Sisyphus rolling that stone up the hill, only to have it collapse on him and roll back down. Or the same archetype actually is Damocles, to where anytime he sits on his throne, there's that sword that's hanging right above his head. He's in danger all the time. So a lot of the archetypes have really, they're just stories about how afraid we are. We're afraid that things are going to get struck or going to fall apart. We're afraid that we're going to be instantly killed by a sword above our head. And so that's what a lot of the archetypes are basic stories about basic feelings. The feeling of being abandoned, being left, is something that happens to some of the babies, okay? So this is where that archetype stuff ends. Let's say it like this, that the instincts, each one of the instincts, is very, very much like a bucket. And that we put the stories and the words and all of the stuff that we learn as little children, we put it into these buckets that we carry so that they get big and heavy. And what we put into those buckets is basically the superego. So the bucket itself is the id, and the contents of the bucket is the superego. And the carrying it around is the ego. And that when the bucket gets really, really full, that means that the contents of the bucket are much more important than the bucket itself. That in fact, what I'm saying now about this bucket and the contents and the carrier, actually is a good lead-in into the original topic that I was wanting to mention. And so if you'll bear with me, all we have to do is remember the big three things. There's three things here. The first one is the id, or the self, or the child within us, the actual owner of our life. You can think of it as the reptilian brain in the back. And then we have the contents, and that is all of the mammalian brain, the temporal lobe, all of the stuff that has all the memories, including all of the rules and how to feel and all of that kind of stuff. And then we have the frontal cortex, which is the part of us that makes us human, that allows us to actually see and make connections and understand things better than dogs. But dogs also have the ability to learn tricks. And so you can say that the super ego of a dog is much smaller, and his frontal cortex is very tiny. So they're mostly just instinctual, but not always. You can teach a dog to stop barking. That some dogs just bark at anybody and everybody that comes to the door. Then they can be taught that, no, this is a friend. You don't have to bark at him. And then you can teach them not to bark at anybody. I'm not sure that you want them to do that. I think you want to be selective so that they can bark at anybody they don't know, and then you're safer. That's one of the reasons to have a dog. But back to the point now. Here's the story. During the Carter administration, there was a law passed, and that law was called the Land Reclamation Act. And it was a big whoop-de-doo, because what it really was going on is that there was a whole lot of coal mining going on in Kentucky, in West Virginia, in Ohio, and then also a lot of strip mining that was done up in the great Northwest. So that law became kind of ignored. They weren't doing anything with it. And the reason for it was because it came into the Reagan administration, and they weren't doing anything about the law. So it got into court, and the court ordered, among other things, a database. That's where I come in with it, or at least get a chance to look at what's going on, kind of from the side. And part of then, I was actually, due to a friend of mine, I was able to attend a lecture that was given by a very, very high-powered lawyer, that was given a lecture to a whole group of people who were in charge of doing this database, because he was giving them the legal parameters about which to build it. And this is what I got out of that lecture. He says that there are owners, and then there are controllers, and then there are agents. Owners, controllers, and agents. And that was what was going on in the coal mine industry. So what would happen is that they would sell the entire coal mining company and all of its stuff to Aunt Susie. And Aunt Susie now becomes the owner. And she's never been to that coal mine. She never gets any money out of the coal mine. The only thing that they've got on her is that she owns the coal mine, and that we're looking for. Oh, I need to mention this. The reason for this is because of giving new coal mining permits. You've got to go clean up your land. And when you clean up the land from your old coal mine, then we'll give you a land permit for the next one. In case there, but there was also an exception about how big the coal mine had to be. And that exception led to what we called a string of pearls. So that they'd have a little coal mine here, and then right next door they'd have another coal mine, and it would go right down the vein of the coal, and then the next coal mine and the next coal mine, right? And each one of these coal mines was owned by a different person, but they were all controlled by the same guy. So here's where we come into ownership and control. Though we are the instinctual one, the owner, the child within, we are often controlled by circumstances. We're controlled by basically our memory systems. We're controlled by our parents, the parent ego state or the super ego. So what they decided to do with this is go after the agents instead, so that the agents were in the same position as both the owners and the controllers of these coal mines, because only the agents had any control over the actual owners. They're the only ones who really knew the owners. But if you're going to be an agent that's dealing with the government about this particular coal mine, then that means then that now the government can say, you're the agent for this coal mine, you're the agent for all these other coal mines, you're not going to get any more permits by any means as an agent until you clean this stuff up. Well, see, he's just an agent. So this is the situation that we have now. We have the three parts of our own mind. We have the reptilian brain, we have the midsection, the reptilian brain being this child, the owner, the self, the individual, and then we have all of these rites, rules, rituals, ways to do things, memories. All this is called, in some ways, it's called Sankara, and in other ways, it's called Silabhata Paramasa. And that's the bucket's contents, and the contents of the bucket define the bucket more than the bucket itself. In other words, if the bucket is almost empty, it's easy to pick up and throw around and do whatever you want to. But if it's full of lead, you can't even pick it up and move it, right? So when we understand that, now we can start applying this to the Dhamma. And here's how it goes. Imagine, because in fact, Scott, have you been seeing Keyshawn's this week's post on Skype where he's actually changed his name to Agent?
Yeah, I saw it.
Okay, that's due to a conversation that I had with him that starts right here, right now. Okay, but all of you will have this situation in the sense that there is a mate, a girlfriend, a friend, somebody that you deal with, and that you're in a conversation with her or him. And in this case, whatever they say, they think they're saying it to you, but in fact, they're only saying it to the you that's in their head. So when the girlfriend says, Keyshawn, she's not talking to Keyshawn that's standing in the room. She's talking to Keyshawn that's in her head. That whenever I talk to you, Scott, I can't talk to the actual Scott. I can only talk to the Scott that I know of in my head. Why? Because the actual Scott's a moving target. He's swinging that bucket all over the place. But what I can do is I can remember who Scott is, or David, or Tim. So when we think of that like that, even we do not actually know who we're talking to. All we know is what we remember of them. So we're actually talking to our own creation in our own mind. So when someone else is talking, they think to you, they're not. They're really just talking about a creation in their own mind. Now, that means then, well, how are we going to receive it? Because normally the receptor is supposed to be the owner. And yet generally it's put through a sieve in the sense of the content of the bucket in order to protect it. So we have then this situation to where we either are the owner or the controller, but we don't have any real agency. This is the wisdom part of the mind, or this is the frontal cortex. And that you can imagine in this scenario, in this room now, we're going to create a third person. And the third person in the room, let us make sure we understand. The first person in the room is the girl and the you in her mind. The second person in the room is the you in your own mind, including all of your rules and all of that kind of stuff. And then the third person in the room becomes the agent. Now, the agent's job is to take care of his client. And so we're going to allow you to come outside of your own mentality and begin to see that, Scott, you're the agent of little Scott. The Scott that's under pressure because the girlfriend is yelling at the Scott in her head, and you think that it's you. And the agent is going to come in and protect you. All right, so we're actually going to start having this third idea of protecting ourselves by this agent. Well, now this agent is nothing more than the frontal cortex or our wisdom eye. And we can also say that the Buddha was actually mentioning this when he says, come out of your unwholesome thoughts by inspection. We have to remember to look and then to make a change. Well, that's the agent right there coming in. The agent is to remember to take a look. Now the agent actually takes a look and makes a change so that the child doesn't have to deal with criticism and unwholesome stuff. We're going to protect the child. We're going to nurture the child. And so you can begin to understand that if I can practice this, then I will never have to feel bad again because I've got an agent who is going to protect me from it. When the big bad government, my wife, comes after me, the government is not going to find me at all. All they can find is the agent, and the agent is wise, and the agent's going to protect me. So that leaves us in the state of we can become easygoing, no need for fear, because we're going to be protected by our wisdom, by that agent. This agent that's actually the better part of the mind. The feeling part of the mind is the anterior cortex, the reptilian mind. That's where all of the feelings are. But now we're going to start letting the frontal cortex nurture, guard, and protect, rather than having that child in us exposed to this nasty world that we find ourselves in.
Dhammarato,
yes, go ahead.
Is that what we're doing when we take refuge?
Well, it depends upon whether you're talking about taking refuge as a ceremony or whether you're talking about taking refuge right here, right now.
Right.
We take actually refuge in the Dhamma, but we can also, in this analogy, say that we're taking refuge by hiding behind our better instincts or our better wisdom, that we can hide behind that. We can find refuge. The self or the ego or, the child, the id within us can find refuge because before the child has been trying to find refuge within the rules, within the way things are supposed to be. Now we can find refuge in the wisdom. So yes, that's exactly what we're doing. We're finding refuge. Refuge from all of the rules, from all the way that things are supposed to be that we don't match up to, as well as all the criticisms and everything that we hear. We can let wisdom be that new guard. Not a guard in the sense of a filter, but a guard in the sense of a deflector. It doesn't necessarily just filter out some of the garbage and let some of it in. No, we're going to deflect it all so that you can feel very secure and very safe inside that little human being that's in there someplace, that child within us, all of that feeling, all of that desire, all of that wanting, all of that stuff. Here's the point about that we feel insecure, and then someone comes with a new rule that will paint bright red and put the label on it as rebirth. Rebirth or reincarnation. And so we say, oh, we'll use that as a lifeline to help me feel better. And the reality is that you're already safe. You've got an agent here that's dealing with things, going to deal with your death too. So you don't need to feel afraid of death. If you're not afraid of death, then you don't need something beyond death. a second chance, a do-over. We don't need a do-over. Let's do this one and do it well and be satisfied with what we're doing in this life without needing a new life. And so with that kind of statement, that's actually the agent speaking. The agent is the one who says, we don't need a new life. We've got this one. Let's enjoy this one. Go ahead, Scott.
Would it be fair to say that wisdom is beyond death and the full fruition of wisdom, in the sense that if you can understand cause and effect, you understand the conditionality of birth and the conditionality of death. In a sense, you have escaped the matrix of birth and death because you understand reality, right? So
Yes.
in a sense, in some sense, that's beyond death, but that's more to do with the realization right now of the way things are instead of a future lifetime, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, the general point is that very few are ready to die. Occasionally, when someone dies, they're ready for it because they've gotten too sick. They know they're not going to get any better. All I've got is this bed. I might as well go ahead and check out. So some people actually die that way, and they choose when to die because there's nothing left for them. But most people are afraid to die. Those of us who are walking around and breathing and eating and saying hi to folks and all of that, we want to continue to do all of that stuff, and we don't want to die. Right? And so actually what that means then is it brings in the fear of death. We don't want to die. And so metaphors being what they are, the word death actually takes on various meanings. And that, like in fact, my laptop died, right? No, it didn't. It's still there. I can take, I can take organs out of it. I can take the heart or the processor and the memory or whatnot like that. I can go find out what's wrong with the laptop, put it back together, and let it go. So the laptops don't die. They wind up in the salvage or in the landfill, and they're still got good parts in them. Not for long, not when the ants get to it, because they'll eat up everything. But the point is that when we say the laptop dies, that's still just a metaphor. Laptops don't die. They become dysfunctional, but humans become dysfunctional. But how many of us are afraid of becoming dysfunctional? Only a few of us. Most of us are afraid of what we call death. And it's really, the problem is the fear of death. Those people, as I mentioned, that are laying in the hospital and they see no future at all. I'll never get out of this hospital bed. The legs are not doing it, and the lungs are not doing it, and everything is falling apart. Might as well go ahead and check out, right? For them, there is no death. For them, there is no fear of death. For them, it's just taking it easy. A little too easy, but that's all they're doing, is just taking it easy. Then in Christianity, we have the phrase that where is the sting? That death has no sting. Now, the reason that is often understood is to be that you will be resurrected like Jesus. Jesus didn't have a real sting when he died because he was just being resurrected. And same thing will happen to you if you sucked up to the right thing. So the point that we're looking at here is there's a distinction between an actual death and the dying process and the fear that's associated with it. So that death has no sting is not really death at all. It's just relaxation. The real death is loss of something. The loss of doing things. And when you don't care anymore about doing anything, you've already lost it. And so you're still alive. But since you've lost everything, there's nothing left to do except just go ahead and pass off. Right? So this is also, here's another point is, well, if you actually do lose everything, but you're not really sick, but you just lost everything, then how many years can you go? Or even if you're sick, you can still go years and years and years. This gives the idea of the definition of freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose. It's not necessarily fear of death, it's the fear of loss that we have to deal with. And when we don't have anything left to lose, we can see that as as freedom. Really, freedom is when we don't have anything left to lose because we've dropped it all. We've dumped it all out. We're now back to full-blown instincts and the agent because we have dumped out all of the memories, all of the ways the world works, all of the rules, all the rites, all the rituals don't affect us anymore. In other words, our bucket is now empty. There is no more controller that is controlling you with the rules. So in that way, that becomes kind of a deathless state. It's deathless because there is no future for death. That's just another day of relaxation. A little bit too far, but that's all it is. Real death in our language and the way that we use it is loss of everything. And when you don't care about losing anything, then death has no sting. So in the Buddhist sense, we look at that death has no sting in advance, to where the Christians look at it in later.
Also, wouldn't you say the fear of death is based on ignorance? Because if you fully realize the three characteristics, anatta, anicca, then you realize that, like, in a sense, that this human body and this the eye faculty, everything that comprises your body and your mind is just, it's not really personal. It's just appearing and disappearing on its own, and it's impermanent. So it's like only the delusion that, like, you're a continuous soul within that, or like you're continuous, like, person driving the car that can disappear or die and then be reborn in heaven or hell, or for the atheist just become annihilated. But, like, it was never there to begin.
That was the correct word, by the way, annihilation.
Yeah, annihilationism. Yeah. Even the atheist thinks that they have a soul. Is the problem.
Right. They just think it's going to be annihilated. Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So the original point that you were making is also, Scott, spot on. It is our ignorance. Now, the ignorance comes in two ways. One way, it comes from when we're really, really kids. We just don't know anything. Everything is a new experience. So one kind of ignorance is raw. In other words, raw in the sense that we don't know, and we don't even know what we don't know. About bigger things, humanity is still in that state. We don't know, and we don't know what we don't know. But then the next kind of ignorance comes in with society, because we don't know what we don't know. We make up as a society and as old uncles. You can imagine sitting on the stump around the fire, and the kids are asking Uncle Bob why the stars are up there, and he's going to come up with an entire religion by the end of the evening. He's just making stuff up. Humans are good at just making stuff up and passing it down to the kids, who then believe it, and now they're going to make it up again and add to it and give to the next generation. And in 500 years from now, you've got great big fancy robes and cathedrals and all kinds of stuff devoted around that little story that Uncle Bob told, sitting on a log out in the woods. That's where all of this stuff comes from. So that's the second kind of ignorance. The ignorance is the stuff that we're told. And as children, we're too young and too dumb and have no wisdom, and so we don't know that what we're being told is a pack of lies, that it's this propaganda. Now that you can understand, since the 1930s, that almost all news broadcasts, almost all stories, almost everything that you see on the internet MSNBC, CNN, Fox, it doesn't matter who it is, it's their version of the news. And so you've got to, if you want to really hear the news, you got to go get it all over the place and try to synthesize it. Then, in fact, we have to do that kind of with Buddhism also, in the sense that in Tibet, they've got a Buddhism that looks really strange, but there's still Buddhism there. You just got a whole bunch of Tibetan and a little bit of Buddhism. And the same thing is true in Thailand. The same thing is true in Japan. The same thing is true in China. So we all have, but we can pull the truth out of it by investigating all the various versions of it to see that there's a thread in there. And that thread is dukkha, dukkha nirodha. The Paticca is not really a teaching within the Mahayana, but I tell you what, the Dalai Lama was certainly interested in hearing what Bhikkhu Buddhadasa had to say about Paticca. So if we can do that with Buddhism, we can also do that with the facts, if you want to bother. Okay, but you got to hear several different brands, because every version of the news that you hear is going to be propaganda, trying to make a point in their favor or something. And so that's where society gets built up. The whole of human society is a whole pack of lies built upon a little bit of truth. So if you can recognize that, be careful and filter or deflect that stuff when it comes in. Use your agent to say, I don't need to be affected by that. I don't know the source of it. That way we won't fall in love with any politicians or any belief systems or anything. We'll just feel easygoing because we've got an agent that's going to protect us from all of that stuff that the children or the child within would become sick over. Or the parent within us is going to get into operation and start making things a certain way. But when we use wisdom, when we use our own agent, and the agent's job is to nurture, protect, and take care of the client. That's the part that we want to really get into, is let that nurturing part of you be forefront in every conversation that you're in with people. Use your wisdom. So, yes, Tim, go ahead.
I'm signing off. I'll catch you in a week or two.
All right. Well, I was about to say we've pretty well covered this. Does anybody have anything that they want to add or any questions? Tim, we'll catch you later. Victor, do you have any questions?
You were talking about, I just have a question on just self-righteousness, and it's a sort of becoming. So just tying in with the topic that you were talking about, just made me realize that sometimes just this self-righteousness is the self that is being threatened by just an external scenario, and some people just make up stories to tell ourselves how that person is not right, or they're just doing the wrong thing, but that's just really asserting our own sense of self or personality, and how sometimes that's even like an instinct that's just like it's very primal, and it just made me realize that.
Yes, it is very primal. The child within us would rather not have all of the rules, especially those that apply only to me. But if I've got to have a rule, I want everybody else to have a rule. Okay, so in fact, the word that you used was self-righteousness. A better word in that regard would be hypocrisy. Is we want other people to follow the rule, and if we see how that works, then we'll follow the rule ourselves. Maybe. But we want to use, but we don't like these rules that we carry around, and instead of just dropping them, we try to give them away to other people.
It's very attractive though. It's like, it's sometimes like in a moment, like it feels like the right thing, or it's just very intoxicating. So that's maybe something that's like an instinct or something.
All right. So here's the thing then. When someone does something and you don't like it, then that's where the possible hypocrisy will show up. What I'm recommending here is to protect yourself from what they're doing so that you don't get to the state of not liking it. You could just see that who they're talking to is not even here. The person that they're talking to is inside their own mind. They don't even know who you are. Therefore, how could it possibly make you feel bad? See, this is the way that the agent looks at it is that, oh, my child is okay. There's nothing wrong with him. He's okay. All right. But when somebody says something about you not following their rules, then you begin to feel bad because you think that the you that you are is the you that they're talking to, and they're not talking to you. They're talking to the you in your own, the you that they have in their own mind, and that's the easy way out. It really makes it easy. So all the only job that you have to do is deflect and protect that child feeling really, really nurtured. So that when they say something, you can give them back a great big smile from that agent saying, "Ha ha, I heard that." and therefore you become absolutely immune to the criticism. Now, the Buddha had another point about that, which is good. In this sense, also, we can put it into context. He said in the Sutra number 22, in the simile of the snake, where this is, by the way, in the same paragraph, Scott, that you were mentioning about what is an atheist is upon the breakup of the body, the existing being is annihilated. This is what the Buddha was accused of being. He was accused of teaching atheism. So, what he says is that they were reviling him for that. They were putting him down for that. And he says that when people do revile me on that account, the reviling, there is no dejection of heart. And then he also says that upon when somebody reveres, compliments, or says something good about you, on that account, we don't feel an elation of the heart. Why is that? Because upon that kind of stuff, we've done it before. You were in high school. You were being both ridiculed and complimented. It happened when you're in junior high school. It happened in college. It happens, and it's happening, and it happens. Get over it, man. Okay, and the phrase then is, been there, done that. I have been reviled before. I have been accused. And basically they don't even know who they're accusing. They just want to go out there and accuse. So when somebody is in fact arguing with you or accusing you of doing something wrong, let that agent, that wiser part of you, protect and nourish the little kid within you, because they don't even know that kid. All they know is their own ideas of your past, which is basically what we're known by then, is not the owner, the real person inside. We're known by the controller. All of those rules, the way that we present ourselves to the world is according to the way that we should be presenting ourselves to the world, which means that we're presenting our superego. We are rarely presenting our id, only in intimate situations when we're really good and close and feeling really, really open and friendly and safe. Do we actually expose the id? It almost always is kept tight, and we mistakenly use the superego to protect it. Well, guess what? The superego is also critical. That when the person was criticizing you, they were criticizing you out of their superego, not out of their id. So, yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? Yeah, they don't know who you really are. All they know is what you present to the world based upon a set of standards, a set of rules, a set of this is how I'm supposed to be. Here's an example of that. Have you ever seen some of the spectacular makeovers that they've done on television? Some sorry sap comes in dejected, unhappy, not kept up well, needs a shave, etc., like that. And they'll do a makeover and they make them into a completely different person. Right? We can actually do that on the outside. But the reason the original person was dressed the way that they were was because they were presenting themselves through their superego. The attitude that they say who they are, that's what they look like. And that we can do a full makeover. Not just with makeup and powdered wigs or whatever, and high-heeled shoes and this kind of stuff, but we can make over the attitude. We can protect that child rather than criticize the child. So I offer to you guys the agent. Become your own agent. Don't let the child and the superego have to deal with the world. Let your wisdom deal with the world, while the job of the agent is also to protect you from the world. Just like the agent in, okay, here's several different versions of agents. A lawyer is an agent. Who wants to deal with the justice system on their own? Oh no, we need some wise agent who's going to get in there and do the best job they can for us. How about an accountant? Accountant is also an agent, right? Because the accountant is wanting to do the job correctly, and the child or the superego is trying to save money. So therefore, it's safer to use an agent. Okay, so in this regard, we want to become our own agent and let our agent then deal with the world, while the agent shields and protects the child from that big bad government out there. All of those people who have criticisms, etc. They can't touch you. All of those slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, they're deflected. They miss. So, Scott, I offer you this. When Keyshawn heard about this, he said, absolutely. And that's why he actually put his name in there as agent. He's going to become Keyshawn's agent now.
I like it. It's good stuff. But I feel like the next level of that agent is the Dhammakaya agent.
Yes, exactly.
Reality is your agent. Reality itself.
Reality becomes the agent. Exactly. But right now we can't see out. We can't see reality very clearly. We still have all that super ego in there. So we're going to bring this intermediate, this watcher, this observer.
There's a progression for sure. Mm-hmm. Like there's a step, and even within the same, like even within my same meditation, like sometimes when you get to the Dhammakaya, or when you get to those really profound realization, well, there's cycles, right? There's ups and downs, and then sometimes you need to go back to the agent of the child.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
So
Yes, exactly. I agree 100%, Scott. You said it quite well also. So, Victor, do you have anything to add, or how about you, David? Go ahead, Victor.
No, I was just going to say I don't have anything. Go ahead, David. I think David was going to say something.
All right. David, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. Yeah.
All right. Okay, guys. Well, enjoy your agency.
Thank you.
The Scott agency and the Victor agency and the David agency. Excellent, guys. We'll see you later. See you next time.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Dhammarato.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.